The shovel hit rock. Elias Kane didn't flinch. He just set his jaw tighter and chipped at the stone like it was something personal. The late sun bled gold across the rust-colored prairie, casting long, warped shadows over the crooked headstones. The town called this place Mercy Hill, though there was little mercy in it. Graves got dug, whether a soul deserved peace or not. Elias leaned on the shovel, sweat glinting at his brow beneath the brim of a hat that hadn't been new in years. The grave was done, just another hole in a town full of 'em. That's when he saw her. Black dress, black veil, black gloves. She stood at the edge of the plot like she'd grown there, pale hands, too still. Her eyes, the only thing not hidden, were a storm he wasn't ready for. "I didn't hear you ride in," he said. "I didn't ride," she answered, voice soft as dusk. She stepped forward and looked down at the casket like it owed her something. Elias watched her kneel, pull something from her coat, folded paper, old and frayed, and tuck it beneath the coffin lid just as he swung it shut. She looked up and their eyes locked. "You bury him deep," she said, "deeper than the others." "Why's that?" "Because they'll come looking." Before he could ask who they were, she turned and walked back toward town like a shadow going home. Elias stared after her. He'd buried over 100 folks out here. Some had names, some just faces, but he knew every one of them. This one? He didn't. He knelt beside the headstone, freshly carved oak from the undertaker's shop. The name read, Silas March, age, unknown, cause of death, accident. He opened his coat, pulled out a weather-beaten leather ledger. He flipped through it, page after careful page. No Silas March. That wasn't right. Elias Kane never forgot the dead. He carried them all. Wind rose across the prairie, sharp and sour. In the distance the town bell rang for evening prayers, but no one would be praying for this one. As he packed up his tools, something caught his eye, glinting from the soil like a tooth. A coin. No, not a coin. A brass railroad token. Still warm. His hands went still. They say some men dig graves because they like the silence. Elias wasn't one of them. He dug because he thought death was honest. You go in the ground, and that's that. But that token told him otherwise. And that woman's eyes? They hadn't mourned, they'd warned. Mercy Hill's graveyard had no gates. It didn't need them. The dead stayed put. At least that's what Elias used to believe. Elias Kane sat by lantern light in his one-room shack, the kind of quiet around him that felt loaded, like a gun cocked in the dark. He had the ledger open in his lap. The spine creaked like an old man's knees as he flipped pages worn thin by the years. Every name in there, he remembered them, not just the faces, the weight of the casket, the way the earth settled, the smell. But Silas March? No memory, no grave orders, no entry. And yet the dirt was on his boots. He turned the pages again, slower this time. He wasn't looking for the name. He was looking for a mistake. Some scribbled margin. Something to say he'd lost his mind and not something else. Instead, he found something worse. A woman's name, Lucille Granger, entered 6 months back. He remembered digging the hole, but not the burial. No coffin, no mourners, no marker. Just a dawn job under the sheriff's watchful eye. Tull had said it was a quiet matter. Elias never asked questions. He just dug. But now, Lucille Granger had been a schoolteacher. Folks said she left town to care for a sick aunt in St. Louis. Elias had believed it, until now. He traced the ink with a finger, still smudged from when the page got wet. Rain. That stormy morning. "Damn you," he muttered. He wasn't sure if it was meant for her or himself. A hard knock at the door made him jolt. He slammed the book shut and stood. The lantern flickered. A shadow passed the window. He reached for the shotgun beside the door, but when he opened it, no one. Just the ledger, now lying on the porch, pages fluttering in the wind like it had been thrown out of his hands. Except, it wasn't his ledger. It was another copy, same cover, same binding, but the handwriting inside wasn't his. He flipped through the names. Most he didn't recognize, some he did. Some were names that still walked around Mercy Hill: Sheriff Tull, Reverend Hayes, even Mara Lorne. Every one of them marked with a cross beside the name. Some crossed out, others underlined. He stared down at the name Elias Kane, etched near the back. Under it, 2 words: buried alive. A knock again. He turned, this time expecting something. Nothing but the night, the wind, and the graves outside shifting in the shadows. He set the second ledger down beside his own. Pages from both seemed to whisper when they touched. Elias sat again. He dipped his pen in ink, turned a fresh page in his original book, and wrote: Silas March, unknown. Grave, dug. Coffin, closed. Mourner, 1 woman, no tears, no horse, no past. Note buried in coffin, unretrievable. Something is wrong. He underlined that last sentence twice. Outside, the wind shifted. It didn't sound like the wind anymore. It sounded like breathing. You could smell the man before you saw him: trail dust, sweat, and the copper tang of old blood. The town of Mercy Hill didn't get many visitors. Folks that passed through rarely stayed long. Most who did were either hiding from something or heading for a hole in Elias Kane's corner of dirt. That morning, the wind blew in more than dust. It blew in him. Elias was shoveling ash out from under his stove when the hoofbeats started, slow and deliberate, like the horse knew it wasn't in a hurry, but the rider had nowhere else to be. He rose, stepped onto the porch, and saw the rider coming down the main street. Tall man, broad-shouldered, wore his duster like a coffin liner, black, long, and frayed at the edges. His face was shadowed by the tilt of his hat, but you could see the burn across his jaw even from 50 feet away. Scarred, like someone had tried to carve a secret out of him and failed. He rode straight past the saloon, past the general store, and pulled up at the undertaker's, right across from the graveyard. Didn't hitch his horse, just stepped down and stared across the fence line like he was reading the stones from memory. Elias crossed the road slow, boots crunching gravel. He stopped a few paces behind the man. The air between them felt thick, like gunpowder hanging over a dry fire. "You lose someone?" Elias asked. The man didn't look at him. "Name was Benjamin Stone," he said. "Buried 2 months ago, according to a letter I got from the sheriff himself." Elias frowned. "That name's not familiar." "Should be. The sheriff said you put him in the ground." Elias folded his arms. "I don't bury what ain't dead." The man finally turned, and his eyes hit like ice water. "You buried my brother." A long silence stretched between them, full of dirt and doubt. Elias rubbed a calloused thumb over his jaw. "Come with me." They walked through the graveyard, passing wind-worn headstones and fresh earth. The man's boots crunched every step like a drumbeat. Elias stopped at the ledger post, the one the town required him to hang the daily names on. He opened the box, flipped through the entries. "Stone, Benjamin," he said slowly. "Nope, no burial here." "Then why the damn letter?" the man snapped. "That's a question for Sheriff Tull." The man's jaw tightened. "He's the one who signed it." He reached into his coat and pulled a folded parchment, yellowed and stamped with the county seal. Elias took it and scanned the writing. It looked official. It looked real. But it was dated 6 weeks before Elias had returned from a week's travel to Fort Constance. He handed it back. "Not my pen, not my grave." They stood there, the gravedigger and the stranger, among the silent dead. "I'm Emery," the man finally said. "Emery Stone." Elias nodded once. Kane. Elias Kane, Emery echoed. You keep records? Elias hesitated. Used to. What changed? Elias turned toward the grave of Silas March, the mound still fresh. Someone's rewriting the truth, he said, and I think they started with the dead. You don't learn much from a man's words, but the things he won't say, that's where the truth hides. Mara Lorne returned to the graveyard just as the sun dipped behind the buttes, setting the horizon on fire. She wore the same black veil, though this time her gloves were gone. Her hands trembled, fingers stained with ink. Elias saw her from across the fence line and stepped out from the chapel shed. He didn't speak, just watched her kneel before the grave of Silas March like she'd been summoned. She held something, a worn leather notebook. He caught only a glimpse before she slipped it back into her coat. I thought you were done mourning, Elias said, approaching slow. I am, she replied without turning. This ain't mourning, it's remembering. He rested his weight on the shovel in his hand. Silas March. You said they'd come looking for him. Who's they, Mara? She looked up at him through the veil. Her eyes were red but dry. The kind of men who wear silver on Sundays and blood on Mondays. That's when Emery appeared behind them, having trailed Elias from the undertaker's. His coat flared with the wind. His boots were silent in the dirt. You're Mara Lorne, he said. Widow of Elias Lorne, Confederate scout turned railroad scout, went missing 2 years back. Mara stiffened. He didn't go missing. Elias looked between them. You buried him? I buried something, she said. But it wasn't him. Emery frowned. What do you mean? Mara rose, brushing the dust from her skirts. I mean they gave me a coffin, told me not to open it, said it was best to remember him whole. Her voice cracked then, just a flicker, like a boot heel against bone. They gave me a deed, some hush money, and a pine box, but I knew it wasn't him. Elias stepped closer. Then who's in that grave? She looked at the mound like it might answer. That's what I came to find out. A long silence passed between them. Wind whispered through the crooked crosses. Emery broke it. I found a letter in the courthouse records, signed by Sheriff Tull. It claims your husband died of exposure. Mara scoffed. He didn't freeze to death. He ran. Ran from what? Elias asked. Her hand went to her coat again, clutching the notebook inside. From the things he helped bury, the maps, the rail lines, the people. Elias narrowed his eyes. That book you carry, what is it? Her eyes met his. It's the list of names they wanted gone. She turned away before either man could stop her. Some men plant seeds, some dig holes. My husband helped pave over both. She walked off into the dusk, boots leaving faint prints behind. Emery leaned in close to Elias. You trust her? Elias watched her fade into the dying light. No, he said, but I trust the dead, and they're not done talking. When men of the law come bearing silence instead of justice, you ain't in a town. You're in a lie dressed up in a badge. Sheriff Thaddeus Tull didn't knock when he arrived. He didn't dismount either. Elias had just finished boiling coffee on the stove when the shadow of 3 horses fell across his porch. He stepped outside with the tin cup still steaming in his hand. The sheriff sat tall, square-shouldered, wearing that iron jaw and crooked grin he was known for. The 2 deputies behind him looked nervous. Too nervous for a casual visit. Kane, Tull said, tipping his hat without warmth. Heard you had company. Elias didn't blink. Lot of folks come to grieve lately. The sheriff grunted, glancing at the graveyard behind the cabin. Trouble is, not everyone buried out there was meant to be remembered. One of the deputies coughed like he wanted to speak, but a side eye from Tull shut him up cold. Elias took a long sip from his cup. Funny thing, Sheriff, dead don't usually care what you remember. But the living do, Tull said, leaning slightly in his saddle. Especially the ones with stakes in the dirt. Is that what Silas March was? A stake? Tull's smile twitched. Silas who? The name carved into a fresh grave last week. One not in my ledger. A long beat passed. The wind moved, but no one did. That grave's been filled, Tull finally said. So it's done. Elias set his cup down slow. Not for me. You're a digger, Kane, not a priest, not a lawman. Your job's the whole, not the story behind it. Emery stepped out from the shadows of the shed behind the cabin. Rifle slung low, but his posture said ready. Sheriff, he nodded coldly. Tull's lip curled. Pinkerton, ain't you? Used to be, Emery said. Now I bury the liars. Tull nudged his horse forward just enough to make it clear this was a warning, not a visit. You boys are playing with things best left buried. That ledger of yours might be wise to let it go, before someone else decides to dig a grave with your name on it. He tugged the reins, turned back toward town, but as he did, he tossed something from his saddlebag. It hit the ground with a dull thud, Elias's stolen ledger, pages dirt-streaked and warped. I didn't take it, Tull said over his shoulder, but I sure as hell returned it. You're welcome. And then they rode off, hooves heavy and fast. Elias bent down, picked up the book. It felt cold, wrong. Inside, certain pages were missing, not torn, cut. He looked at Emery. They're hiding something, Elias said. No, Emery said grimly, eyes fixed on the distant dust trail. They already buried it. Now they're just making sure no one unearths the truth. Elias closed the ledger and stared down at his boots. The earth was quiet again. Too quiet, and still hungry. The church was built from dead trees and dying promises, and sometimes the worst sins were whispered from the altar. Sunday morning cracked open with the sound of the chapel bell. Elias didn't attend church, never had. He figured if God needed to find him, he knew where to look. But this time he stood in the shadows outside the wooden building, leaning against the post like a man eavesdropping on ghosts. Inside, Reverend Malcolm Hayes raised his arms, voice spilling like molasses across the rows of bowed heads. And the Lord said unto the grave, Give up the hidden, for nothing buried stays buried forever. Elias's jaw tensed. Reverend Hayes had a face like cracked porcelain, smooth on the surface, but something ugly ran underneath. His voice carried easy, sweet as bourbon, the kind of man who could bless you while twisting a knife in your ribs. Pride, he continued, eyes scanning the pews, is the shovel of damnation. And I warn you, Mercy Hill, some among us are digging more than graves. Mara sat 3 rows back, alone, hands clenched in her lap. Her veil was gone today. Her face pale, mouth tight. She wasn't praying. She was listening. Elias wasn't the only one watching her. Emery sat behind her, unreadable. The sermon wound on, parables soaked in blood, verses that bit too close to the bone, and then, There are forces in this town that seek to raise the dead, Hayes said, voice dropping low. Not with God's power, but with man's pride. Some dig to find truth, but you dig long enough, you just find rot. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Mara stood suddenly, too fast. She swayed, then collapsed. Elias was through the door before anyone else moved, boots echoing against the floorboards. She was breathing, but her skin had gone white. Her eyes fluttered. Emery knelt beside her. Mara. Her lips moved. Just a whisper. They burned it. What? Elias asked. She blinked up at him, dazed. The book, my husband's first list, the one with the children, they burned it. Reverend Hayes stepped down from the pulpit, calm as a snake. "Best get her outside," he said. "The heat can steal a woman's senses." Elias didn't answer. He lifted her gently, carried her out while the church watched in stiff silence. Outside, the wind had turned. The air smelled of ash. He set her on the bench under the elm tree beside the cemetery. Her fingers dug into his shirt as he pulled away. "They were just kids," she muttered. "He found out the graves weren't all adults. That's when he changed. That's when they came for him." Elias looked to the church doors. Hayes stood in the shadows, watching. "You think the preacher?" Emery began. "I think that man's been giving eulogies for folks who ain't supposed to be dead." Elias looked back at the church one last time, and for a flicker, just a second, he thought he saw a face in the stained glass window that didn't belong to any saint. The land remembers, even when men try to cover it in steel and lies. The courthouse basement smelled like mold and regrets. Emery lit a match, the flickering glow painting the cracked stone walls in restless shadows. Shelves of rotting records lined the room, land deeds, tax rolls, town maps, forgotten paperwork for a town built on forgetting. Elias moved carefully behind him, one hand on his revolver, the other holding a lantern. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Proof," Emery muttered. "Something older than the lies." He pulled a box from the shelf marked Surveyor's Files, 1872. Inside were rolled maps, brittle as old parchment. Emery laid them on a nearby table, smoothing them out beneath the lantern glow. "These show Mercy Hill before the railroad came," he said. Elias leaned in. The map showed a narrow stream running where the tracks now lay, and a field marked with hash lines. "Those aren't crops," Emery said. "That's a graveyard." Elias blinked. "There was a cemetery here before this one?" Emery nodded. "No records in the church. No transfer. Just vanished." He unrolled the second map. "Now look, this is the land after the rails were laid. No stream, no graves, just track." Elias stared. "They built the railroad over the bones." Footsteps echoed upstairs. Both men froze. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A shaft of light sliced down, followed by a voice. "You boys lose your way?" Sheriff Tull's voice, slow and syrupy, calm like a snake in warm sun. Emery didn't move. "Just confirming what we already knew." Tull's boots thudded on each step as he descended, alone. "I admire your spirit," he said. "But digging into old plots don't change where the rails run now." He stopped at the table, eyes scanning the maps. "You planning to show these to someone?" Emery folded the paper slowly. "Depends on how loud you want this to get." Tull's smile faded. "Loud gets people killed." He tossed something on the table. A railroad token, same as the one Elias found near Silas March's grave. "This was in my office this morning. No note, no name." Elias picked it up. It was warm, too warm, like it hadn't come from any pocket. "The graves are fighting back," Elias said quietly. Tull turned to him, eyes narrowed. "You really believe that?" "I believe the dirt knows when it's been lied to." Tull stared a moment longer, then nodded once. "Last warning, Kane. You keep turning over stones. Eventually something crawls out you can't bury again." He left without another word. Emery looked at Elias. "You scared?" Elias rolled the token in his palm. "Ain't fear that keeps me up. It's the feeling I already dug this grave once, and forgot I did." He looked back at the map, at the long black line where bones had been buried and steel now screamed through. "They didn't just pave over the past," he said. "They sealed it in. The trouble with digging up the truth is, sometimes it ain't dead yet." The sun hadn't risen when Elias and Emery rode out toward the old field where the surveyor's map had marked forgotten graves. The prairie grass was high, dry, and whispering. Fog clung to the ground like it knew something it wouldn't say. They left the horses at the ridge and walked down to the low flats with only shovels and a lantern. No one talked. The sky was dark enough to feel like a warning. Elias found the spot easy. His gut told him before the shovel did. He drove the blade into the earth. It gave too easily. They dug in silence. 6 feet down, Elias hit wood, but it wasn't a coffin. It was a crate, military issued, scorched along one edge, stamped with a rail company seal and a date, 1877. Emery wiped the dirt off with his sleeve. "This ain't regulation burial." They pried the lid open. Inside, curled up like a question mark, was a man's body, face frozen mid-scream, mouth open, eyes wide, hands clenched in fists. No wounds, no blood, just a look like he'd seen hell itself before the air gave out. "God damn," Emery whispered. The corpse wore a badge on a frayed sash. Not a sheriff's, not a deputy's, a railroad foreman. Something clinked at the bottom of the crate. Elias reached in and pulled out a bundle of yellowed paper, pages tied with leather string, weathered but dry. He opened the top sheet. A list of names, more than 30, each crossed out in red. At the bottom, "Delivered." Elias's hands trembled. Mara's voice echoed in his mind. He found the list with the children. "Look at this," Emery said. He held up the man's lapel. There, tucked beneath the coat lining, was a patch stitched in with black thread, barely visible, a snake swallowing its tail, the symbol of the Perseus Line, the railroad's most secretive expansion outfit. Rumors surrounded them about land grabs, disappearing camps, men who'd been paid to look the other way. "We need to show Mara," Elias said. Before they could cover the body again, a sound cracked across the prairie. Gunfire. A bullet kicked dirt near Emery's feet. They dropped fast, rolling behind the grave mound. Lantern smashed. Light gone. 3 more shots rang out, whistling past. "Ridge line," Emery hissed. Elias squinted. A figure on horseback turned against the pale gray sky, then vanished into the fog. Emery raised his rifle to fire, but Elias grabbed his arm. "No, not yet." The rider was gone. Elias looked down at the open crate. The face inside stared up like it was still screaming. "No grave marker," Elias muttered. "No ceremony, just a box full of ghosts." He pulled out the ledger, flipped to a fresh page, and began to write. "Unmarked grave, Perseus agent. Cause of death, unknown. Body language, terror. Items recovered, list of names, Perseus seal. Buried, not yet." He tore the page free, folded it, and tucked it into the corpse's coat pocket. "If they're keeping records," Elias said, "so are we." Secrets are like graves. The deeper they're buried, the harder they hit when they rise. The storm hit just after midnight. Thunder rolled low like hooves across the sky, and rain tapped hard on Elias's cabin roof like fingers trying to claw their way in. Mara sat in the corner by the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, her wet hair clinging to her neck. Elias poured her coffee, black, hot, and silent. She hadn't spoken since Emery brought her in, soaked to the bone and shaking from more than the cold. Outside the wind howled. Inside the truth was about to. "I lied," she said softly. Elias turned from the fire. Emery looked up from the table where he was drying the ledger with gentle care. Mara's voice shook, but not from fear. "My husband didn't die the way I said," she whispered. "He didn't run." She stood slowly, reaching into her coat, pulled out a sealed envelope, edges singed like it had survived fire. Her hands trembled as she passed it to Elias. "He found something," she said. "And they found out he found it." Elias broke the seal. Inside were torn journal pages, smudged ink, A sketched map, names, coordinates, crude outlines of graves. Beside one was a drawing of a child's doll. "They used him," she said. "The railroad. Reverend Hayes. Sheriff Tull. They paid him to scout ahead, find land soft enough to dig through. He thought he was just clearing paths for track." Her voice cracked. "But it wasn't land they were clearing. It was people." Emery stood slowly. "Are you saying they killed families, whole settler camps, claimed they died from fever or Indian raids, buried them in unmarked pits, then ran the railroad right through 'em?" She met Elias's eyes. "When he tried to stop it, they didn't kill him. They made an example of him." Elias stepped forward. "What was in the coffin they gave you?" Mara looked away. "I didn't open it, but the weight wasn't right, and when I buried it, the ground, it didn't take like it should have, like it knew." Emery clenched his fists. "They've been doing this for years, keeping it quiet, scrubbing records, killing anyone who asks the wrong question." Elias handed him the envelope. "Not anymore." Mara stared into the fire. "There's more. A ledger my husband kept, the first one, with the children's names. I buried it before they came for me." Elias's voice was low. "Where?" Her eyes flicked toward the back of the room. "Same spot they left the empty coffin, under the sycamore tree, behind the grave marked Daniel Reed." Emery moved toward the door. Elias grabbed his coat, but Mara caught his sleeve. "Wait." He turned. Her eyes burned. "They buried him alive, Elias. My husband. He was still breathing when they nailed that box shut." Elias stared at her, frozen. "And now," she said, "I think they're planning to do the same to you." Some ghosts knock. Others burn the whole damn door down. The smell hit first, burnt wood, singed cloth, and the bitter stench of scorched earth. Elias sat up fast, breath caught in his throat. Outside, the sky glowed orange. Flames danced along the ridgeline like devils with torches. He rushed from the cabin, boots thudding against hard-packed dirt. Emery was already outside, rifle in hand. Mara trailed behind, barefoot, eyes wide. The fire wasn't random. It was in the graveyard. They crested the hill and froze. The crosses burned. Dozens of wooden markers cracked and collapsed into ash. Black smoke curled into the sky, blotting out the stars. Coffin lids were wrenched open, some fully dug up, their occupants missing. The grave of Silas March was nothing but a pit of glowing embers. Mara dropped to her knees. "No," she breathed. Elias ran forward, flinging water from a barrel across a smoldering patch of grass, but it was useless. The fire hadn't come to consume. It had come to cleanse, to erase. Something glinted in the dirt. Elias knelt, brushing soot aside. A railroad token, another one, then another. He dug with his hands, desperate, frantic. He unearthed 6 of them, all still warm. "No scorch marks," Emery said behind him. "They were placed here after the fire started." Elias stood. "It's a message." Mara looked up, tears cutting through ash on her face. "They're wiping the names. Every one of them." Emery cursed under his breath. "And they know we're watching." A sharp whistle broke the night. Elias turned toward the chapel. The front door hung open. The fire hadn't touched it. The bell tower above began to toll, though no rope moved. No wind stirred. The sound was wrong, low, metallic, almost mournful. Elias gripped his shovel like a weapon. "We need to check the ledger box," he said. They ran toward the chapel. Inside the box, the current burial records were missing, torn from the spindle. In their place sat a folded piece of fine stationery. Emery opened it. "This ends now," Leave the graves or join them. T. Sheriff, Emery muttered. Mara backed away slowly, eyes drawn to the altar. There, nailed to the wooden pulpit with a blood-streaked railroad spike, was a child's rag doll, one they'd seen sketched in the list Elias had found. Elias stepped forward, voice hollow. They're not just warning us, they're daring us. Emery raised his rifle and fired once, blowing the doll to pieces. The echo rolled through the church like thunder in a tomb. Outside, the bell stopped ringing. No wind, no sound, nothing moved, and yet. The smoke curled upward, forming the faintest outline of a face above the scorched graveyard. Eyes, mouth open, screaming, then gone. Mara whispered, "They're not just covering up the dead." She turned, face pale and certain. "They're using them." There's something worse than a grave with no name, one with no bones. Morning came thick with smoke and silence. The townsfolk didn't ask questions about the fire. No one came to help. No one mentioned the burned graves. It was like the night had been erased, memory and all. But Elias remembered, and so did the dirt. He and Emery stood behind the chapel where the sycamore tree bent low over the grave marked Daniel Reed. Mara knelt nearby, fingers tracing the cracked headstone like it might whisper back. "Are you sure this is it?" Elias asked. Mara nodded. "He told me if anything ever happened, to bury it here. Said the roots would keep it safe." Elias jammed the shovel into the soil. The earth resisted at first. Not hard, but reluctant, like it knew. Emery watched the tree sway overhead, though the wind had stilled. Elias hit wood. Not a coffin this time, a box, weathered but intact. He and Emery heaved it out and cracked it open. Inside was a worn, leather-bound book, the original ledger. Elias opened it slowly, heart pounding, names, dates, ages, some as young as 6. Beside each, relocated, or no witnesses, and sometimes just used. Mara stepped closer. "He didn't tell me what that meant, but I know it wasn't anything holy." The last few pages were different. Sketches, rough diagrams, burial sites, and a list titled "The Hollow Men." 12 names, all marked with the same symbol, a circle with no center, empty. Emery leaned in. "I know this one." He tapped a name. Elroy Sampson, railroad foreman, went missing in 78. His death was never reported. Paperwork just stopped. "I buried that man," Elias said quietly. "Except I didn't. His coffin was light. Too light." Mara pulled another sheet from the box. A drawing of what looked like a man, but off. Limbs too long. No face. Just the outline of a head, and the circle carved into its chest. "What is this?" she asked. Elias didn't answer, because he didn't know. But in his gut, something shifted. "These aren't just graves," he said. "They're containers." Emery frowned. "Containers for what?" The wind suddenly rose, the sycamore tree groaned, and then a voice, faint, like a whisper across gravel. "I remember." The 3 of them froze. Elias turned, scanning the headstones. No one. But the voice came again, from beneath their feet. Mara backed away. "It's not just the truth that's been buried." Elias slammed the box shut. "We take this and go. Now." As they loaded the box into the wagon, Emery turned back to the grave, and paused. The soil was moving, just slightly, breathing. He didn't say anything, not yet. But as they rode back toward the cabin, Mara clutched the ledger to her chest like it was both salvation and sin. And Elias knew. This wasn't about memory anymore. It was about what had been left behind. When a man of God starts offering silence instead of salvation, it ain't scripture he's preaching, it's control. The preacher waited on Elias's porch. He sat in the old rocking chair like he owned the wood beneath him, hat in his lap, eyes calm and unblinking. Reverend Malcolm Hayes looked like he hadn't slept, but his collar was still crisp. His hands, folded neatly, were too clean for a man who'd spent a night with fire licking his graveyard. Elias stopped short, boots crunching gravel. "You're on the wrong side of town," he said, shovel still in his hand from the dig. "I've been on the wrong side of things for years," Hayes replied without humor. "Figured it's time to step into the shade." Emery stood just behind Elias, hand resting on his sidearm. Mara lingered in the doorway, clutching the ledger like a shield. The preacher's gaze drifted to her, but he didn't speak to her. His focus stayed on Elias. "Let's talk," Hayes said, "before this becomes something you can't bury." Elias crossed his arms. "I'm all ears." The preacher leaned forward slightly. "I know about the list, the hollow men, the map you unearthed. I know you've got your own version of the truth written out neat in that little black book of yours." He glanced toward the cabin, then back to Elias. "You think you've dug up a scandal, but what you're carrying is a fuse." Elias said nothing. Hayes continued. "Mercy Hill's built on sins older than either of us. The railroad didn't just buy land, they bought silence, they bought memory, and they paid with blood." "You let it happen," Elias said, voice low. "All of it. Children, families, lies." Hayes nodded once. "I did." That stopped Elias cold. "I buried what I had to," the preacher said. "Not just bodies, doubt, fear, guilt. I gave people something to believe in so they wouldn't see what was being done in their name." Mara stepped forward. "And what do you want now? Forgiveness?" "No," Hayes said quietly. "I want you to stop." He reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a folded sheet of parchment, a deed, land, money, safe passage out of the county. "Take it," he said. "Disappear. Let the ground keep what it knows." Emery stepped past Elias. "What if we don't?" Hayes looked at him. "Then you'll find out how deep a man can be buried without anyone noticing." Elias stared at the deed, then at the preacher's face. "You ever ask yourself," he said, "if maybe it ain't the graves that need covering, but the men still walking?" Hayes stood. "I've asked myself a lot of things," he said, "and I've never liked the answers." He placed the deed on the porch railing and walked off without another word. The rocking chair kept swaying, even after he was gone. The dead don't knock when they return, they leave pages. It was just past dawn when Elias opened the door and found it waiting for him. The original ledger. Not the one he kept under his bed, not the one they'd buried beneath Daniel Reed's grave. This was another copy, identical in size, same worn leather cover, but the pages were soaked, mud-streaked, a few torn, and most unsettling of all, new entries had been added. Emery and Mara rushed to the porch as Elias thumbed through it in silence, each name scrawled in tight, angry strokes. Some he recognized, folks long dead, others still alive. Sheriff Tull, Reverend Hayes, Mayor Brixley, even Emery. Then he stopped, his own name, Elias Kane, marked with a red underline. Below it a single phrase in different handwriting, "Buried alive." His mouth went dry. "What is this?" Mara asked, stepping close. "It's a death list," Emery said grimly, "and it's not finished." Elias handed the book to Mara. She turned the last page, blank save for one date at the top. Today. Then the page began to darken. Words appeared, like ink drawn from invisible hands. A new name formed at the bottom, Mara Lorne. She gasped and dropped the book like it had burned her. Emery caught it before it hit the floor. "This is a warning," he said, "or a countdown." Elias picked up the ledger again. His fingers brushed the edge of the page where her name had been inked. "It's not just names," he said. "It's claims. These are graves promised. Or owed." Mara trembled. "But why mine?" A silence hung between them, heavy as thunder. Elias turned and walked into the house. He returned with a battered satchel and laid it on the porch table. Inside was the original ledger, the one he'd kept hidden since before all this started. He opened both books side by side, same pages, same format, except the returned ledger had entries his never did, events no one had recorded, some that hadn't even happened yet. Emery leaned in. "It's being written by someone, or something, with knowledge we don't have." Mara stared down at her name, then flipped back a few pages. She froze. "What is it?" Elias asked. She showed them. Elias Kane was in her husband's ledger too, listed years ago. Death status, deceased, recovered, repurposed. She looked at him, breath gone. "Elias, how long have you been here?" He blinked. 20 years. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You were buried. My husband wrote it down." Silence again. Elias stepped back, dizzy. The porch spun. "I don't remember being buried," Mara whispered. "Maybe you weren't meant to." Emery didn't speak, just stared at Elias, eyes slowly widening as understanding hit. "You're not just the gravedigger, Elias," he said. "You're one of them. Sometimes the cruelest grave is the one you're left in, alive and alone." They came for Mara before the sun had finished rising. Elias woke to the sound of hooves and hushed commands, too many voices for a quiet visit. By the time he reached the porch, she was gone. The door hung open. The ledger lay face down in the dirt. A note had been tacked to the railing with a rusted nail. "She's not well. She'll be cared for. Stay out of it." T. Elias's hands shook as he read, his chest hollowed like a fresh-dug grave. Emery paced nearby, jaw clenched, rifle slung over his shoulder. "They took her to that asylum outside Whitlow," he said. "Same place her husband was rumored to be sent before they gave her the box." Elias nodded once. "We ride at dusk." But Emery didn't move. Instead, he dropped his saddlebag onto the table with a heavy thud and unbuckled the flap. Inside, documents, rail contracts, land grants, payment orders signed by local officials, all stamped with the Perseus seal. Elias skimmed them, blood thudding in his ears. "Where'd you get this?" Emery didn't answer right away, just stared into the distance. "Remember that crate we found in the field?" he finally said. "With the body, the list, the seal?" Elias nodded. "I wasn't looking for my brother when I came here, Elias," Emery said. "I was sent." Elias straightened. "Sent by who?" "By what's left of the Pinkertons who haven't sold their soul to the rails. Mara's husband was one of ours. We lost contact. We knew something was wrong." Elias's jaw clenched. "You used me." "I used both of you," Emery said quietly. "But I didn't expect to care." The words didn't help. Elias's eyes burned. "You tipped off Tull." "No, I didn't. But I think someone else did." Emery paused. "Maybe Mara herself." Elias turned sharply. "What the hell are you saying?" Emery hesitated. Then, "There are entries in the ledgers written in her hand. Not just her husband's." Elias stared at him, the weight of betrayal like a boot on his chest. She knew. She may have helped, Emery whispered. At first, maybe she thought she could stop it from the inside. Maybe she tried. Elias looked away. She buried something under Daniel Reed's grave. What if it wasn't just the ledger? Rain began to patter lightly on the roof, like the start of a slow funeral dirge. Emery spoke again. We need to leave. Tonight. Head east. Expose the documents. Get them in the right hands. Elias didn't respond. He walked out into the drizzle, toward the edge of the graveyard. The wind cut cold. He dropped to his knees at an open patch of earth and began to dig. Emery watched from the porch, unsure if Elias was burying something or preparing a place to die. The earth gives back what it doesn't want, and sometimes it spits out the truth with blood on it. Elias dug all through the night. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soft, the sky heavy with more to come. He didn't stop to rest, didn't speak, just dug. By the time dawn broke, the hole was 6 feet deep. Emery stood nearby, rifle across his chest, watching with the stillness of a man waiting for something to go wrong. And it did. The shovel struck wood, but it wasn't a coffin. It was a sealed crate, iron-bound, soaked through, and humming faintly. Not with sound, but with wrongness. Elias climbed out and pried it open. Inside lay a body, not rotted, not skeletal, fresh. Eyes wide open, frozen mid-scream, lips torn, fingers curled like claws. Emery knelt down slowly. That's her husband, Mara's husband. Elias swallowed hard. She said he was buried years ago. This ain't a man buried years ago. Emery pulled the coat back. A badge, a Perseus line insignia, and something else. A slip of paper pinned to the inside lapel, still dry despite everything else being soaked. Elias plucked it free and unfolded it, scrawled in black ink. I was wrong. They're not burying the dead. They're burying the ones who remember. E.L. Below the signature was another note, written in a different hand. Delivered. Elias leaned back, heart pounding. They held him somewhere, kept him alive. Until he talked, Emery said. Then they finished it. They stared at the corpse for a long time. Elias finally stood and looked down the ridge toward the sanitarium outside Whitlow. They took Mara, he said, but they didn't take her to hide her. They took her to shut her up. Emery stood too. So we go get her. Elias shook his head. We don't get her. We raise hell. They reburied the body, but this time Elias marked the grave with a crude wooden stake, carved a single word into the bark with the edge of his shovel. Truth. He didn't bother with a sermon, just stared at the dirt and whispered, You weren't the only one they tried to bury. Back at the cabin they loaded the wagon with every document, every map, every ledger page they'd found. Elias strapped his rifle to the saddle. Emery loaded the dynamite. They weren't going to sneak in, they were going to tear the walls down. As they prepared to leave, a gust of wind kicked up, and with it, a scrap of paper floated across the yard. Elias caught it. It was a torn page from the returned ledger, just one name written on it, Mara Lorne, and beside it, Resurrection Denied. Elias looked toward the east, toward the place she was being kept. No, he whispered, not this time. You can bury a body, you can bury a truth, but you can't bury a man who's already been to hell and walked back out with a shovel. The asylum outside Whitlow sat on a rise like a forgotten castle, red brick, iron gates, and windows like empty eyes. The sign read St. Bartholomew's Rest, but there was no rest in that place. Elias and Emery arrived at dusk, the sky bleeding orange behind them. They didn't knock. Dynamite does a fine job of opening locked doors. The east wing exploded in fire and stone. Smoke curled up as if the land was exhaling centuries of silence. While Emery held the guards at gunpoint, Elias stormed the halls, shouting Mara's name like a war cry. He found her in a padded cell, half-drugged, wrists bound, eyes wild. When she saw him, the fog in her gaze lifted. "You came," she whispered. "I dig up what's buried," Elias said, cutting her free. She collapsed into his arms, trembling. Downstairs, Emery lit the last of the charges, this one aimed at the records room. Files, names, falsified death certificates, all of it about to burn. But then he saw it. A file with Elias's name. Cain, Elias. Deceased. Body unclaimed. Recovered, 1864. Repurposed, Perseus Division. He froze. A black and white photograph was paperclipped to the folder. It was Elias, but not as he looked now. Younger, sharper, wearing a soldier's coat, and dead behind the eyes. Emery shoved the file into his coat and ran. They escaped through the west gate as the building collapsed behind them. Later, by the firelight, Mara sipped from a tin cup, hands shaking but color back in her cheeks. Emery patched her wounds in silence. Elias sat apart, staring into the flames. Finally, Emery tossed the file onto the table between them. Elias stared at it, then picked it up, read every word, didn't flinch. "I always wondered why I never remembered my childhood," he said quietly, "or why the graves felt familiar, like I was putting things back." Mara sat beside him. "You weren't just the gravedigger," she said. "No," he replied. "I was the first one they buried." Silence hung between them. Then Elias opened his ledger, the original, the one he wrote by hand, the one no one else ever touched, and added a final entry: Cain, Elias, buried 1864, exhumed 1865, repurposed 1866, redeemed now. He closed the book. "No one else writes the ending," he said. He handed the ledger to Mara. "You carry it from now on." She stared at him. "Where are you going?" He stood, slung his shovel over his shoulder. "There is one more grave left to dig." "Whose?" she asked. He looked out over the hills, where the rails stretched like a scar. "The one with no name." Final shot. Elias walks alone into the darkness, the shovel tapping against his back like a drumbeat. Somewhere ahead the truth waits, forgotten, buried, and hungry. But this time, it's the gravedigger who's coming for it. Thanks for listening. Please like this video and subscribe to Saddlehorn Stories. Until next time.